Everyone loves talking about the Persian Empire, like it was just Xerxes yelling at the ocean and building palaces the size of small countries. Cool, cool. But nobody ever asks the actual important question. Where did regular Persian people go home to after a long day of, I don't know, paying taxes to a guy who thinks he owns the tide? Because here's the thing. While Persepolis was out here looking like a limestone flex with 40-foot columns, most Persians were living in mudbrick houses that honestly would not survive one bad rainstorm. No AC, no Wi-Fi, and definitely no just Amazon Prime a new roof. And yet these people cracked climate control thousands of years before we did, using literally just wind. So how did an empire this rich end up living in houses made of dirt? And how did they turn that dirt into genuinely genius engineering? Let's get into it. Architecture. Alright, so let's talk mudbrick, because I promise it's less boring than it sounds. Most Persians, not the kings, not the nobles, just regular working people, lived in homes built from sun-dried mudbrick, sometimes reinforced with straw, kind of like ancient Persia's version of DIY home renovation, except the material was mud we found nearby, instead of a trip to Home Depot. And look, mudbrick gets clowned a lot because it sounds flimsy, but it was actually a genius choice for the climate. Iran's plateau swings between brutal summer heat and freezing winter nights, and mudbrick is basically a natural insulator. It soaks up heat slowly during the day and releases it slowly at night, so your house isn't a furnace at 2 p.m. and an icebox at 2 a.m. Basically, the ancient version of smart thermostat, except the thermostat is just dirt that took a few centuries to figure itself out. Now here's where it gets genuinely impressive, and I mean this, the Badgir or wind catcher. Picture a tower sticking up from the roof of a house, kind of like a chimney that got ambitious. Its whole job was to catch even the faintest breeze passing overhead and funnel it down into the house while pushing the hot stale air up and out. No electricity, no moving parts, just architecture doing the job of a Dyson fan that somehow also works during a power outage. Historians believe wind catchers were already in use in ancient Persia and became especially associated with hot regions like Yazd. And honestly, when you think about it, that's wild. An entire city figured out passive air conditioning while we're over here complaining that our AC bill went up $20 in July. And it wasn't just about staying cool for comfort's sake. Some homes and public buildings paired wind catchers with underground water channels called qanats, so the incoming air would pass over cool water first. Basically, an ancient evaporative cooling system, which is a fancy way of saying they built themselves a natural swamp cooler before natural was even a marketing buzzword. Meanwhile, qanats themselves deserve their own shout-out because these were underground tunnels, sometimes stretching for miles, built to carry groundwater from higher elevations down to villages and farms without it evaporating in the desert heat along the way. Digging these things was brutal, dangerous work, but the payoff was a stable water supply in a region that could otherwise be unforgiving. So, while Rome gets all the credit for aqueducts, Persia's out here quietly running an underground plumbing network like it's nothing. Now, let's talk layout. Because Persian homes weren't just four walls and a wind tower. They were built around courtyards, the typical household, especially the wealthier ones. But this idea trickled down in scale to more modest homes too, was arranged around a central open-air courtyard, often with rooms facing inward rather than outward toward the street. Why? Privacy, mostly, plus temperature control again, because that open courtyard helped air circulate through the whole house. Basically the ancient equivalent of an apartment with great cross-ventilation, except instead of a real estate listing bragging about it, it was just how you built a house if you didn't want to melt. Wealthier homes could get seriously elaborate. We're talking multiple courtyards, separate sections for receiving guests versus private family life, sometimes even small gardens with fruit trees and water features, because Persians had a genuine cultural love of gardens. Yes, the word paradise actually comes from the old Persian word paradiesa, meaning a walled garden. So when people say a nice backyard is paradise, they're accidentally doing ancient Persian etymology homework. Poorer households obviously scaled all this down, sometimes just a single small courtyard shared between rooms. But the core idea, inward-facing privacy plus natural climate control, showed up across the social ladder. And here's the thing that really gets me. None of this was decorative. Flexing the way a palace column is decorative flexing. Every element served a purpose. The wind catcher wasn't there to look cool. It was there because summers could be brutal, and nobody wanted to die of heat stroke waiting for indoor plumbing to be invented. The courtyard wasn't there for Instagram symmetry. It was there because privacy mattered and airflow mattered more, which honestly says a lot about how practical, resourceful, and frankly smarter than we give them credit. for these ancient builders were. They didn't have concrete, steel, or power tools, and they still out-engineered a lot of what came centuries after. So now that we've got the walls up, the air flowing, and the courtyard sorted, who's actually living inside all this? Because a house is just a house until you throw people into it. And Persian family life inside these walls had its own whole set of dynamics, expectations, and, yeah, probably some drama too. Family life. Okay, so now that the house is built, let's move the furniture in. Metaphorically, because furniture in most ancient Persian homes meant woven rugs, floor cushions, and maybe a low table, not exactly an IKEA situation. And once you step past that courtyard, you're stepping into a household that was first and foremost multi-generational. This wasn't a nuclear family living solo, the way a lot of us picture home today. Persian households often included grandparents, parents, children, and sometimes extended relatives all under one roof, or at least clustered around the same courtyard complex. Basically, imagine your family group chat, except everyone in it also lives in the same house and shares one bathroom situation that definitely wasn't as nice as yours. Family and lineage mattered enormously in Persian society, and the household was organized around the father as head of the family. A structure historians generally describe as patriarchal, which, let's be honest, was pretty standard across most ancient civilizations, so Persia wasn't exactly breaking new ground there. But here's a detail that surprises people. Women in ancient Persia, particularly during the Achaemenid period, actually had more documented rights and economic presence than a lot of other ancient societies at the time. Administrative records from Persepolis, the famous Persepolis fortification tablets, show women, including working women, not just royalty, receiving wages, sometimes at rates comparable to men doing similar labor, and pregnant women receiving increased rations. So while women still operated within a patriarchal system, the record-keeping suggests Persian women weren't just background characters in their own households, they were showing up on the empire's actual payroll spreadsheets, which is more than we can say for a lot of ancient civilizations. Marriage, meanwhile, was less swipe right and more family-business merger. Marriages were typically arranged, often for reasons involving property, alliances, or family standing rather than, romance novel vibes. That doesn't mean affection didn't exist between spouses. It very well could and did, but the initial matchmaking was a practical family decision, not a spontaneous love story. Basically, imagine your parents setting you up not through a dating app, but through a full-on negotiation involving your uncle, a goat, and possibly some land. Marriage contracts and family arrangements were serious enough that they show up in the historical and administrative record, meaning Persians took the legal and economic side of marriage seriously, even if the emotional side developed after the paperwork was signed. Kids growing up in these households had pretty clearly defined paths depending on gender and class. Boys from elite or noble families, according to accounts like those from the Greek historian Xenophon, were educated in things like horsemanship, archery, and very famously, telling the truth, which Persian upbringing apparently emphasized hard. Basically, ancient Persian parenting said, learn to ride a horse, shoot an arrow, and don't lie to your mother, which, honestly, is a more useful childhood curriculum than a lot of what we did in elementary school. For most non-elite families, though, children would have been raised learning the family trade, farming, herding, craft work, because in a mostly agrarian society, a kid wasn't just adorable, they were also eventually free labor, whether that meant tending animals, working the fields, or helping around the household. Daily life inside the home revolved heavily around food, and Persian cuisine, even back then, was already laying groundwork for what would become a genuinely rich culinary tradition: grains, dairy, fruits, and for wealthier households, meat, all prepared and often eaten communally. Meals functioned as a social glue, a moment where that multi-generational household actually came together in the same space, sort of like a family dinner table, except nobody's scrolling their phone under the table because, well, no phones, just family, food, and probably somebody's grandmother critiquing the seasoning. Religion also threaded through daily domestic life, particularly as Zoroastrianism grew more influential across the empire. Fire held deep symbolic and ritual importance, and many households would have maintained some form of domestic fire or hearth ritual tied to Zoroastrian practice, treating the hearth as something closer to sacred rather than just the place where dinner happens. So that central courtyard we talked about, it wasn't just architecturally clever, it was often the emotional and even spiritual center of the household too, where family, food, faith, and daily survival all collided in the same sun-warmed open-air space. And honestly, that's kind of the through line here. The house wasn't separate from the family, It was the family, structurally speaking. The wind catchers kept them alive through brutal summers. The courtyard kept them private and connected. And inside it, generations lived, argued, arranged marriages, raised kids, and passed down trades, all under a roof made of dirt that somehow outsmarted the desert. It's kind of humbling, honestly, that thousands of years later, all that survives of most of these Persian homes and the families who filled them is dust and foundations. But for a while, inside walls made of mud and air pulled down from a tower, an entire ordinary, complicated, loving human life happened there.